So welcome to episode 82 of Silver Lining for Learning. And we're very excited today about our topic, about the Metaverse, and about our guests from the entity formerly known as Facebook, that now is going to be Meta. But first, I want to recognize our co-host, Kurt Bonk, who received a major award this week. So Kurt, please show your award and say just a little bit about it.
So one of my idols, David Jonasson, had passed away around 2012, and they made a research award for him at the ACT conference, the Association for Educational Communications and Technology. And David was the first winner. My colleague Tom Reeves was the second winner, and Tom Reeves wrote a letter for me to get this award. So it's particularly touching that this came my way. And my former students created some artwork with all the people that I published with, and you all are in here somewhere in the artwork. It's numbered by the from 1986 to 2021, and hopefully beyond. So it's kind of touching to be in Chicago getting this award. Thank you, Chris.
So congratulations, Kurt. So I and many others were really impressed in 1984 by William Gibson's Neuromancer, which started a whole science fiction genre called cyberpunk. And then Neil Stephenson in 1992 wrote Snow Crash. And he was the one, I believe, that coined the term the metaverse. But Gibson talked about something similar. Actually, my background is a painting by Thomas Cole, a famous illuminist, in 1840 called The Journey of Life. And I've decided that maybe he had the metaverse in mind, too, with this virtual image in the background of the goal of life's journey. But I've been doing immersive learning research for 3 decades, and I'm just really excited about today's topic because there's a lot of opportunities and there's a lot of challenges with this idea of sort of blending the real and the virtual world. So we're delighted to have 2 Harvard alumni with us, and I'm going to ask Adam to speak first. Adam, I was Adam's doctoral advisor when he was at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. We did very early work with augmented reality at that time. And subsequently, when Adam was technology director for a very, very large school district, we did motivation research on mathematics learning. So I have been inspired by Adam at various points of my career, and I'm happy to welcome him to the show.
Thank you, Chris. I needed a lot of advising, and so I really appreciate that. But thank you so much. Like you said, I've been in education a while, but first I started in the Army. And you know, when I got out of the Army, the first thing they do is they say, "You've been doing a bunch of Army stuff for a while. Let's figure out how that may translate to the civilian world." And so you take an interest inventory. And I took this test, and it said, you should overwhelmingly be a teacher. And young, whatever, at that time, I was like, I don't want to go back to school and get certificates and all this. I'm going to go work in industry and make it big and all that, and kind of ignored what this interest inventory told me. Fast forward a little bit, went to a startup. It did not do well, surprise, but it did not do well around August. And in Boston at the time, where didn't you need kind of a license to try teaching? Well, it was a charter school. And I said, this is a time where, you know, I have this great opportunity to try teaching. Let's give it a go. And so I joined this charter school in Boston, and absolutely, you know, I asked the question, which was, do you need a math or computer science teacher? Yes, tomorrow was the answer, of course. And so I started, and it was unbelievable. The connection with the students, the content, it was just everything that test said it would be for me. But I think fast forward a little bit, I began to get a little bit frustrated because in school systems, at the time at least, the technology was really closed off and very difficult to use. You could use maybe 1 or 2 use cases that somebody thought up, and everything else was blocked. And I could tell this was a way to really shut down the kids instead of really open up their horizons to what's possible with these, the newfangled interwebs and so forth. And at that point decided the only way to change this is to go back and lead technology in school systems. So that's when I went back to Harvard and met with Chris, and you became my advisor and guided me through this journey, which was really, how do we lead technology in school systems at scale, where the technology kind of fades into the background, and the pedagogical techniques, the creativity of students, and everything else takes the front row seat. And during this process, got really interested in scaling. So as a tech director, you don't get different. You just get bigger and bigger and bigger in school systems. And I began to work with the likes of Google and other big companies to bring wonderful technology to students, and became a little bit obsessed with the scale that these companies could reach. I could reach maybe 60,000 students, which is an incredible amount of students. But at these companies, they could reach billions of people. And that's really what informed my journey to then Facebook, now Meta, which was really this notion of how do we really scale these solutions that put the technology in the background and the creativity in the foreground for students at just an astronomical scale. And that's where we are today with the Metaverse, which we'll get into.
Monica, tell us about you.
Yeah, and actually, I love hearing these stories. I didn't even know half of that, so it's always fun to hear. But I always joke, most people who get asked the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, all of us in the immersive tech industry got it wrong in high school, because most of us didn't even know the technology was going to exist or could exist. And so I think we all bring with us this varied background, which is, I think, what's helping it with this area of innovation moving forward, because we all bring something completely different to it. So my first career chose me. I was a math major in college, and at the time, the big consulting firms were coming around and asking if we wanted to be actuaries. I had no idea what that was, but Deloitte came, gave me a good offer. So I was like, all right. Took me about a year into the job to understand what an actuary really did. But it was fun. We made a lot of mathematical models. But in my time there, we had a corporate outreach program. And so year 3, they asked if I go into the public schools in Manhattan and talk to the students about the importance of staying in school. And I really loved talking to the students. I got a tremendous amount of energy from that. But I do remember walking out of the school and feeling just a little bit sad that I didn't feel like there was a lot of learning going on, a lot of teaching going on. And so I thought deeply about what it was that used to get me excited about learning, that got me curious. And I'm pretty sure it's when we brought technology into the classroom, which for me didn't happen until college, but we could suddenly map out topographies of surfaces and mountains and orbits of planets and molecules, and everything came alive in a way that it just made me hooked. So I kept wondering why we weren't doing this for younger grades. And so out of curiosity, I visited a bunch of other schools, recognized that they were largely the same. And I think it's the first time in my life where I wanted to be part of the solution. I felt like now I could go from the job I could do because I had the degree, to what I actually wanted to do to add value. So that's what brought me over to Harvard, which is actually when I met Adam. He was my TA, so he was grading my papers. He gave me a geometry problem that I couldn't solve, and I'm still embarrassed about that to this day, right in front of class. Fun fact, actually, I learned the other day that Mark Zuckerberg and Andrew Bosworth also had that same relationship. Boz was Mark's TA at Harvard as well, and now they're also working at Meta together. So fun parallel there. But after my time at Harvard, I really focused deeply on how to use technology to increase access to education and also transform the way that we learn through tech. So got to teach for 10 incredible years, both math and astronomy. And I would spend hours every single night trying to make lessons that were visually rich and engaging and connected the real world to what we were doing. And over time, people kept saying, you have to do this on a larger scale. You have to bring your lessons to more students. And I recognized at that point that technology really was the answer for that. So hopped over to tech in an effort to do that, first at Amazon, then at Facebook. And I think it was probably week 3 at Facebook that someone gave me a demo of VR. And then the first time I put that headset on, I just knew instantly that it was going to be the medium that I wanted for the kinds of lessons I envisioned. And so I was really lucky. It was right when Adam and a couple people at Oculus had secured $10 million to build educational experiences. So up to that point, it was largely gaming. And the charge was just throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. We actually don't know what's going to work in immersive learning. We don't know what it's like to learn in simulated environments. And I think one of the big surprises out of that whole thing was the empathy that's capable through VR. Before it was if you're a first person experience or you traveled somewhere, you could feel that. But VR tricks your brain into feeling like you can actually walk in someone else's shoes. And so that was an incredible learning that we had. But I recognize every time we put people in an experience, oftentimes they come out and say, well, how do I build it? And we actually didn't really have a way for them to build it. So we'd send them over to Unity or Unreal. But it got me thinking that there are going to be a lot of jobs in the AR VR space really soon, and we don't have a huge amount of talent to fulfill them. So I hopped over to the AR team that actually has the tool Spark AR Studio to build, and we put together, curriculum so that we could actually train the next generation of creators using AR. And these little pieces were great, but we recognized that to actually do something substantial, the opportunity we would have would be to figure out how to bring it all together. And honestly, the pandemic accelerated those solutions because I think we started to recognize that we need technology to keep bringing education to the masses. And then our company changed to Meta. And so now Adam and I have this incredible opportunity to really understand what it looks like to build that ecosystem and just build a foundation for what learning can be in the metaverse and bring it to life.
So I want to ask you a question that actually comes out of the different pathways in the past that are leading to Meta. So one pathway is gaming. And Sherry Turkle and others have written about the promise and the perils of internet gaming, where you basically can have a second life on the screen as a different entity in worlds that often are largely fantasy based. And you feel very immersed in this life and this entity. And so there's this kind of bifurcation between the real world and that life and the virtual world and your life in the game. That's one kind of intellectual history. There's another intellectual history that is more educational, that comes out of the use of educational simulations. I was part of a team that built a simulation called River City from 1999 to 2009 that taught epidemiology by going back 150 years into the past and putting you in a historical setting that was different than the present. And then my colleagues and I, over another 10-year period, built 4 ecological simulations, the EcoLearn initiative, in which middle school and elementary school students become ecosystem scientists in a simulated ecosystem and can do computer modeling and collect and analyze data and do lots of stuff wearing adult shoes. That's a second kind of intellectual history. And then there's the sort of second life kind of intellectual history where people want to work together, and they want to play together, not in a fantasy world, but in a world that's like the real world. And we've seen that sort of explode in the pandemic. So on the one hand, we're doing Zoom today, video conferencing, but we can have virtual backgrounds and we're not together physically. And I also use the iLearn campus, which is built in Verbella in my teaching, where you have a simulated campus, Second Life-like in nature, with a lot of interesting things you can do, except you can't see each other's faces. You can't pick up on body language and all the cues that we use non-verbally to communicate that are in Zoom, but then you don't have the virtual context in Zoom. So I'm interested. Here's 3 paths. Maybe you can add some others. How is Meta drawing in particular on any of these? What's the metaphor that you think is going to predominate with Meta?
I love that. I actually think we're exploring a lot of those. I mean, I think it is going to be a question of possibly different identities in these areas. I think the gaming persona is absolutely one that's here to stay. And I think gaming is a tremendous way for us to learn a lot of things about working collaboratively, taking risks, thinking quickly on your feet, that translate into a lot of these other spaces. But I think what it ultimately gets to, and I feel like your pathway of examples led to it, is something about this metaverse is actually, it's almost like the new synchronous, right? We have all these opportunities where I think it's like we're missing that town hall feeling through Zoom and the way that we tried to connect, or even having some little virtual avatars that we still can't then have body language. But by being able to pop into these simulated environments, suddenly we're able to have hands and gaze and fingers and body movement. And these are all central to communication, the spatial audio as well. And I think it's what's missing from all of these pieces that you laid out. They all have part of it, but I think the metaverse ultimately is supposed to bring them together into this seamless experience where we can, in fact, almost like bring it back to what it feels like to have those synchronous live experiences. Obviously, in person is always better, but if we can't, we can actually replicate them in a space where we bring together all of those incredibly powerful modes of communication that we're missing. But I think at first, yeah, they'll probably be somewhat separate personas. We feel fortunate that learning has really been highlighted as one of the best use cases to come out of the box with and try to understand and lay the foundation for. Different than our gaming team, right? But that's also an incredible place to make sure that we're supporting too.
Jan, you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, when Monica was talking about AR, VR, I think the whole journey, apparently you guys have done a lot of education. My question is this: does Meta, for example, one of the things is that right now, our students are still under the control of a curriculum, of a teacher, of testing in the school. And so what is, I don't know if you're at the stage yet, like if you were rolling out products to students, what would be the best way to drive them out? And once you have those metaverse, you have AR, VR, you got all those exciting things. And how do you plan to drive them into schools? Or do you want to offer your own school to get whoever wants to be interested in to be into that? I said that, Adam, you guys were laughing. It must be a great operation. But you don't have to answer this question. You may not even have thought about it because inventors are inventing your own ways. Go ahead, anyway.
Well, I'm actually not thinking about schools when I think about this. I'm thinking about learning and just what works and what's engaging to my students, no matter where that happens. And so, schools weren't a part of the picture in the traditional sense in the last few years, right? School was distributed, school was weird and new. School didn't feel right to some, it really worked for others. And so I take it a step back and say, what can we do for learning? And right now, again, like Chris introduced me to what virtual learning and augmented reality learning was back in the day. But I think what's a little different now is the accessibility to it. While everybody doesn't have a headset, a lot of people have a phone, and augmented reality is a nice kind of entry point into doing some really cool things that I would say are supplemental right now. And so, Dr. Zhao, you mentioned the curriculum, the testing and everything. It's very structured in schools. We're certainly aware of this, but where the technology can really be engaging is in right now a supplementary manner. And so, for example, within this tight framework, if you have something that you really want the kids to understand, then an extension activity using some of these technologies to unlock the understanding in different modalities. I mean, as a math teacher, that's what we always tried to do, tabular data, graphical data. Some form of data is going to inspire the student. You just have to find the right one or the right entry point for the students. I think this is another dimension, another way to engage students where we'll really increase the feeling of presence. And what Monica was talking about, like all the features, spatial microphones and really good representations of self, avatars that allow you to take on a persona, different things that are barriers to entry for a normal schooling situation are extension activities and an opportunity to grow. And so I would say we're really focusing on trying to discover and amplify awesome examples of those situations where learning in the metaverse may be a fantastic experience and capture a bunch of people that would otherwise be missed.
Well, so one of the things, I love that answer, because one of the things I'm struggling with is to point students to things beyond their classrooms. Because I think, the education revolution somehow has to take place outside schools, to allow, I don't mean all students, maybe like 5%, 10%, those who are winning, those who are not engaged in schools, to have a place to go. So would this be a metaverse to create it for the alternatives? Again, you get different kind of students. So this will be a powerful to get this, we can go there. I don't need to be here. I can go to metaverse. I said, Monica, you were nodding. Is that what's the plan? Tell us your plan about what you're trying to create, the big thing.
I mean, honestly, I think it's beyond just students. I think learning is something innate to all of us all the time. And I think we want to make sure we're always building in pathways to that curiosity, the creativity, the new way for us to engage with our world and where we're going with it. And so I think some of it might actually start in that space where more people have access to it. And then, so like Adam said, it's really multimodal right now. I think Metaverse will never be everyone in VR. That doesn't really make sense. I think, we want to be humans first, and that's the strongest connection. But this ability to maybe think about what we can do in 2D from our homes, wherever, whatever age we're at, and make it better with 3D, I think is something that we're trying to understand those best use cases. Or even a documentary, you could be watching it, it's great. And maybe 3 times throughout, a little pop-up says, let's go there. You put your headset on and you are in there as a first person exploring that space. Maybe you take part of it with you in AR and then pop it up on the dining room table at dinner and talk to your family about it. Ways that we can connect differently with what we're learning. But we're finding, the use cases are going to keep coming out, and it's still so new. But obviously, things like vocational training are really powerful just to get muscle memory and to be able to have that trial and error in simulated environments. Like I said, the awareness, the empathy building, all of those things add layers that are actually very hard for us to do otherwise. And so part of it is finding the right areas and channels that really change the way we learn and enhance what we have. But there are going to be a lot of challenges. Chris called this out in the beginning. There's not a lot of science behind some of this yet. And so it really is going to take us time to really understand it. And that's not new. That's happened with everything in the technology space, the printing press, TV, internet, right? It's people don't end up regretting it. It's just a bit of a painful process in the beginning. And so there are those elements right now where we're going to have to figure out a lot of this, probably outside the umbrella of traditional learning, especially in the high schools, and then start to bring in what really makes sense when we know that we can support it correctly.
Kurt?
Yeah, so I have a comment and maybe I'll pose a question, but I think it's important to have the audience that's here in YouTube, and I'll ask their questions first. Gerald said, how is the term or concept meta being used? Is it simply a proper noun, or does it have meaning or different implications? Jolynn says, does metaverse have to be associated with VR? Would you say social connection is a key part to the concept of metaverse? How about allowing students having multiple identities within the virtual spaces that you're creating? There's various questions in there. You can take.
Do you want to start by defining metaverse or talking about that, and then we'll get into a learning situation?
Definitely not all in VR. Like we said, I think the way that we're trying to define it is more kind of like this multimodal, seamless experience where you get to go kind of weaving between the physical and the virtual space. So the way that I always think about it is where we actually want to sort of take down those walls between museums and schools and homes and allow access to all the different kinds of learning that happen across these different areas, where everyone can find it and anyone can learn with whoever they want to learn with in whatever environment they want to learn with at any time. And so that can span physical space. It can span anything on the web, and I think the pandemic really moved us into this hybrid situation that we're all very familiar and comfortable with now. Whether what we're using the internet for is like the Zoom calls so that we can communicate synchronously, or just knowledge finding as we search and then have some classes. I think the metaverse will move us into more of a tribrid model where there'll still be some in person. There's still the internet and 2D web-based but there are elements now that are better in simulated environments in VR, through AR, through mixed reality. And so where are these components going to now, again, seamlessly enhance our experience as we go through what we're doing?
And so like a very tangible example of this, like I'm just a naturally curious person. And I was thinking the other day, like one of these things that we had in our house forever that just stopped working was our blender. I think everybody in their house has one thing they've had forever that just doesn't work after 15 years or so. And so this blender stopped working. And I looked up online, like, do I want to buy a new one? Do I want to try and fix it? I'm curious. I want to try and fix it. And so, I'm thinking through, wow, in a metaverse situation, this could be a really cool way to explore this problem. Like first, I'm looking at the physical blender sitting in front of me. I don't know what the heck's wrong. It smoked a little bit, assuming it's something to do with the engine, but I don't even know how to find the engine in it. And so, or the motor, I mean. And so the first thing, like in a metaverse experience, could be the schematics of this thing are activated by AR. And so I point my phone at it. Most people have a phone. Again, I pointed at it, and it kind of explodes a view of this blender into the various components. Oh, there it is. And that's how it's assembled. That's how it's disassembled. Very simple augmented reality experience. But taking it apart and messing with anything, I don't want to break anything else. I'm a little scared of the electricity, whatever. I can go into a virtual experience that walks me through how to repair it. And I can actually practice moving the parts around, taking it apart, putting it back together. Like Monica said, building that muscle memory. And then take the goggles off. I'm back at the blender. And here I am, probably a little more able to understand the problem and a little bit more able to fix it. Now, in the end, I would likely still have to buy a new blender, but at least I would have had a very cool experience exploring my curiosities.
Now, what do you, I know Chris has an interesting, more interesting question. I was just curious. Congress is broken. Are you going to make like a VR, AR experience for us to explore Congress? Just a joke, that's I think that's kind of, more interest, excitement,
So,
I'll let Chris answer that. Yeah.
Kurt, do you have more?
So I do, but I don't think it's a good time for it. I think it's better that we go with the audience questions and your question. The audience seems to have a lot of questions today. Mine is more of a comment of a meta level.
We love it.
Love it. Love it. Keep them coming. I haven't seen any memes on this yet.
So I'll give you another framing to respond to. Jeremy Bailenson wrote just an outstanding book about immersion called Experience on Demand. And he has very creative ideas across the chapters of the ways in which we now can craft different kinds of experiences. And we know that we're kind of wired to learn from experience. We're much more wired to learn from experience than we are to learn from lectures and readings and all the things that we do when we're using an instructionist model. But there's another part of this, and again, there's an intellectual history here of people who've written about this, that's really about identity. That most people have multiple identities inside of them. I don't mean that they're schizophrenic, where those identities are disconnected and at war with one another. I just mean that typically people have a public identity that they show to people that they don't know, and maybe they have a somewhat different identity that they show to people that they know well, and maybe they have another identity, Dreadlord Didi in the gaming community that's quite different than, the kind of kindly professor persona that is my professional persona. And typically those identities are difficult to express. And the metaverse offers an opportunity to perhaps more easily show multiple sides of your identity across a broader spectrum of settings. So there's the kind of, there's experiences that you can have now that are not accessible to you otherwise. And there's also identities that are accessible for you. Yes, I'm bagging groceries by day, but I'm I'm head of a team that takes down the toughest monsters on the internet by night. Is that the kind of conversation you have about in Meta? Is it more about experience? Is it more about identity? Is it about blending the two somehow?
I think blending, I mean, our avatar team is huge and they're thinking deeply about all of this, right? Some people prefer to be animalistic avatars. Some people want very realistic avatars. And I think back to the first question, if your gaming persona might be animalistic and your professional persona might actually be realistic, depending on what you need to be in the metaverse at that time. But I think back to one of the again, when we first released sort of earlier versions of avatars, which are pretty simple in nature, but a lot of educators were observing that students who might often be less likely to speak up in the classroom setting, when they got to design their own avatar and be in a simulated environment, they typically participated more. And so, it begs a question around identity and how is it that we feel most comfortable showing up in these different environments? And even the reverse, how is it that we feel most comfortable learning from other avatars or speaking to other avatars? And so I think this is, again, one of those very new areas where we know that identity is extremely important and that we're probably going to want multiple kinds of identities across the different surfaces where we want to interact in the metaverse. So avatars is very important. It has been hard to understand how to replicate facial expressions and eyes. Obviously, you need all the inside out cameras and tracking and everything else, but we are getting closer with it. There's been tremendous amount of improvement from just 4 years ago to now and what we can do. But I think these are all really interesting to think about. And a lot of, our young adults spend hours creating their avatars and wanting to get the right pieces to show up with. And so I think just like we do in the real world, how we dress, how we present ourselves, the accessories that we have become important as they become available and options in the metaverse. I think they will also become equally as important.
So Gerald and my colleague Julian have similar questions on the YouTube channel. We know that there's different phases of a technology. And in phase 1, you're a consumer of the technology. And in phase 2, you can also be a creator of the technology experiences. And phase 2 just typically explodes use of the technology and invites in a whole different set of people than phase 1 and empowers a whole different set of products than phase 1. And you referred to the fact that historically it has been difficult to author these experiences. Simplistic AR, pretty easy to author, but mastering something like Unity is possible, but not easy, and laborious to build, even with large public graphical libraries of objects. Graphical objects that are custom are still, difficult to create. Do you see some kind of advances in authoring that can really start to open this up, if not to the general public, at least to people in education who are willing to dedicate a little bit of time to trying to become creators?
Yes, to all of that. That is absolutely where we need to support everyone who wants to get into this. So, I mean, we're educators at heart. So clearly we want to absolutely educate the next generation of creators for Meta. And that actually means a lot of different skills across. I mean, everything from learning how to create AR, which is a little bit different than learning how to create VR, to immersive media, to blockchain, to NFTs. There are a lot of different areas that are going to need creators once there's a whole new economy in the metaverse and areas for building and creating. So that is part of what our responsibility is moving forward with this, to make sure that we are supplying not only the right curriculum and lessons for people to learn, also ways where they can learn from each other. These are all pioneers in this space right now. And then the community of creators are sort of the best ones to help bring everybody else along. But the tool is extremely important. And so on the product side, we're constantly trying to understand how we can make the tooling more accessible, make that better. And so these are all pieces that slowly have to come together before we hit that second wave boom, like you said. And there's a little bit of that awkwardness right now, but that is absolutely where we're trying to head, to bring it together, to make it easier. And even, when I was a teacher, you would find lessons online that you wanted to use, but you never wanted to use anything exactly how you found it. You always wanted some flexibility and freedom to take what was there and then make it your own. And so right now, a VR experience is pretty rigid. It is hard to go in and alter something or to make it your own through like a simple drag and drop. So these are all areas that as that supply and demand and the need is there, we'll probably start to put a lot more energy and effort into building that.
So, this is, by the way, I'm really excited about this. We've been playing with VR for 20 years now, AR so we've been playing with a lot of those things. People have been trying, I've written kind of forward for books about how teachers should use AR, VR. It's been, like Chris, it's been extremely difficult, So with Facebook or with Meta, with your power, I mean, your financial power, so you actually could drive something to a large direction. And of course, there are still many startups, new technology companies, new innovations, all of this is driving. And also at the same time, as the majority of schools, of students, of who we are, will try to enjoy it. So could you think about this new Meta experience as another TikTok, like TikTok that just comes out, or another Facebook, just somehow you're providing a valuable experience, hopefully it's all educational, for all children to have access. I'm really curious about your timeline or your thinking. So because our show is watched by a lot of educators. If they say, okay, I want to try that, but not necessarily as a pioneer to try it, okay? But like as a regular user, I can send my kids here. So I'm just curious about where you are. I'm really excited. I'm thinking about quitting my job and joining the Meta team. This is, it sounds like it's getting there. We're over the bridge now, to see.
Yeah. I do want to stress that we're not building it. It's like the internet, right? Like it doesn't belong to anyone. This is more of like an embodied internet. And so it really is the invitation and the next stage is that we need everyone to build this together with us. And so we are looking for the designers, the educators, the thought leaders. This is supposed to be something that is a much more open space. And then we all figure out what needs to live there and how to build that together, which is why those creators become exponentially more important in every industry through every company. So that's something that, again, I really do think, and technology remaps everything. It remaps lives every time something new comes in. You think about when TVs came in, they remap the architecture of homes. And, then now people are having these VR rooms that they can actually move and play. And so I'm very curious about how Meta is going to remap a lot of how we interact with each other, with learning, whether institutional learning is going to change to accommodate whether our lives are. And so these are all things that we don't have exact answers to. We want to build this responsibly. We want to build it with everyone in mind, and we want to make sure that it's valuable, that there's value in the technology and value in where we're headed with it.
I think it's important, like you noted, that Facebook has, I made the first mistake. Meta. Sorry, been here too long. Meta has the resources to kind of catalyze a lot of these things and provide really good proof points and examples. And that's what we hope to do, both in training, like Monica mentioned with Spark AR training. Just about anybody can build augmented reality effects and then use them in the context of their lives, like on Instagram and other things that are very accessible to them. But also great content. And, I think your first experience in immersive learning is hopefully going to be a good one, but there's not a ton of those experiences out there. And so, part of the resources we can use is to kind of catalyze and work with partners to build these great experiences, to show what's possible, to demonstrate what's possible. But there's also a huge access problem, as you noted. Not everybody has devices. Not everybody has the means to experience every aspect of the metaverse. And we'll play a role in that too. Our role in this is to kind of find those that could benefit from increased access and make sure they do have the resources to access these amazing experiences. But again, this isn't something that Meta can do alone. This is a distributed problem. This is a challenge for all of our partners out there.
Kurt?
Yeah, I just want to say, I wish you had been on the show 6 months ago. Chris, why didn't you get
We
him
weren't
6 months
meta
ago?
then.
We weren't meta. We would have been talking to
Oh,
you
weren't
from the
meta.
Facebook
Okay, you weren't
perspective.
meta.
Yeah.
That answers it. So I have a book in press called Transformative Teaching Around the World with 41 stories that's going to come out with mainly Fulbright, award-winning Fulbright teachers from 22 countries, right? And at the end of the chapters, they ask questions for the potential readers out there. But I knew there's something missing. I thought maybe I should have them list the principles, you know, that they use, and we could get 41 people telling us what their instructional principles are. And this could be something that's, you know, making an impact around the world. But Adam and Monica, you gave me two different things I should have asked. So Monica right away got in here and she says, what gets kids excited about learning? I could add every one of these 41 teachers say what, just have that question prompt. What gets kids excited about learning? And then Adam said, I'm thinking about learning. What works for learning? We need to know this. And we could have 2 question prompts that would have been a great assembly of 41 award-winning teachers commenting on what gets them excited and what works for learning. But you've got 1 billion people. You could be asking that of those 1 billion people and maybe distilling it down to 41, maybe crowdsourcing 41 stories of what gets kids excited about learning and what gets teachers excited about learning and what works. And that would be much more, well, equally rich as the 41 stories that I have from individuals. If you could compile some set of stories across the world with all the user group that you have. And by the way, we have one chapter on AR and VR in Yemen, okay, trying to change and we had one from Burma, Myanmar, about a year ago on this show. So AR and VR's making an impact across the wide spectrum of across educational sectors and across the world. So you know, I'm just posing that and pushing you a little bit. Have you thought about crowdsourcing your users and coming up with what are the principles of learning and instruction that are pervasive across contexts, that are replicable, and what are not, and what works and what gets kids excited, what gets teachers excited? Adam first, and then Monica.
Well, that's an important part of the framework, or the lens through which we're looking at this work, is the research component. But most of that is distributed as well, funding amazing research. You mentioned Dr. Bailenson, Chris. Certainly, like a lot of his work informs the way that we're working with partners and thinking about this. And Monica can provide an amazing example of this. But the answer is yes. But I would point to, like, we're also picking partners to work with who nail these answers, who have a great perspective on these things, and building their own experiences that will kind of make this enriched environment.
And yeah, to Adam's point, research has to be foundational to everything we're building right now, because there are so many unknowns, because it is really easy to replicate the biases we have in the current world in a virtual space. And we want to make sure that we're not leaving anybody out. We want to figure out where that value really lies with immersive technology, and how there's no playbook right now, right? We're just building this foundation. So how can we actually, in the next few years, through a lot of research, working across not only academic research, those that are educators, those that are thought leaders in the tech industry, we've compiled sort of this core group that we're going to continue to expand and build to make sure we're hearing voices from everywhere with exactly these questions in mind. How do we start figuring out, one, what the right questions are to ask, and then how we start answering them, and building this playbook so that when we are ready to try to make this mainstream, we've done it in a really responsible way that adds value. And so I think there's still a lot of unknown out there that we are trying to make sure. You know, another area of research that keeps coming up that we haven't really spent a lot of time diving into, but as the technology iterates, we know that a lot of it's actually going to help increase accessibility for students who currently have disabilities or auditory or visual impairments, that actually AR can help fix in real time, in the moment. Is there a way through glasses, which are socially acceptable and nobody knows that it might have a lot of hardware in there, to keep students learning in the environment where they should be, right in the classroom, where no one has to know if they're turning up the volume or not, or getting real time dyslexic text on top of the book that they're reading so that they can, kind of get the resources that they need. And so there's a whole area that this group is starting to uncover of, helping students who are autistic get some of the skills with facial recognition and understanding what they're seeing in prompts that help it very discreetly function within learning environments successfully. So again, that notion of we don't want to leave anybody out as we build, but also can we actually help people kind of be more included that may have not been served by traditional methods before.
Thank you very much. That was great.
So, and you're right that inclusion and helping people who are neurodiverse has been one of the big wins for EdTech in general, and certainly potentially a win here. But I feel compelled to do something we also do on Silver Lining for Learning on a regular basis, which is to talk about the downside of any kind of technology and the ways that it can be misused as well as used. In human history, there's a long pattern that predates certainly digital technologies of going out to a frontier to create a utopian society and leaving behind all the bad baggage that's part of your current context. And sure enough, when you get to the frontier, somehow all that baggage has come along and you replicate the problems that you were trying to leave. And in the very early work in virtual environments, shared virtual environments in the 80s, before internet gaming, people found that participants brought in not just their aspirations and dreams, but their prejudices and their hateful behaviors and all the dark side of human nature that's just intrinsic to us all. And now, if anything, the situation has become more bimodal, where you've got people who are working very hard and creating very positive situations, and you've got people who are acting like trolls and manipulating other people and bringing a lot of hate into these settings. So the technology is interesting. People say technology is neutral. Well, yes and no. Any technology is built in a way that it does some things better than others. You don't want to use a hammer to put a screw into a piece of wood, and you don't want to use a screwdriver to put a nail into a piece of wood. And part of the issue with the design guidelines, I think, is not only drawing on research about learning, but it's drawing on our knowledge about the dark side and how we can try to build both technological structures and human structures that make it harder to pervert the good intent of the metaverse. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, or whether there are lessons learned from prior experiences that we can bring to that, but it's important that we go in with our eyes wide open and not think, oh, this is going to just be, heaven on earth, because if you think that, it's more likely to be hell on earth before you realize what's going on.
Well, Chris, I'm glad you raised that. We're acutely aware at Meta of all of the amazing and not so amazing things that can happen on big platforms, right? And with 3.6 billion people worldwide actively using something from Meta, we have a lot of experience in this. And, really combating some of the things you're talking about and working hard to prevent them. And it's a massive, massive responsibility. And we have I think somewhere around 40,000 staff members already focused 100% on safety and security, as well as just this year spending $5 billion alone on those same topics. And so it's a massive investment. But I want to give you an example of what I think you're talking about. And so, the other night I went into one of our own products. It's a social VR experience called Horizon Worlds. And I went into this, and it's a social VR space and you could choose kind of the thing that you want to do. And I joined a group of people for, I guess, just a social experience or a party or something like that. And when I got into the space, this was actually my first time in this particular world. And it was a little daunting because, I spent some time on my avatar, but I was, not fully, like I didn't get the best username that I thought I wanted. So I was a little self-conscious when I went in there. And I started walking around in this virtual space, and I heard some people talking, and the directional sound is just unbelievable. So I could walk closer to them and hear it louder. And somebody said hi, or whatever. And I didn't know what to do at that particular moment. But then I saw somebody with a little icon popped up that said community manager or community leader or something like that. And he walked over to me and he greeted me. And the first thing he said is, welcome, this is what you are. How are you finding it so far? Are you able to move around okay? And he walked me through some of the settings to make my motion a little bit easier and so forth. And then the first thing he said after that was, if at any time you don't feel safe, this is what you do. Turn your wrist up, push the 3 lines, and go into your safe space. And it was a really interesting, set of experiences that I had there. One, I was greeted by somebody who is safe, clearly identified as somebody who can help me. And one of the first things he said is, this is how you can get in your safe space. This is what you can do to protect yourself if something like you're talking about would occur. And so it's something we're already building in. It's something that I think every responsible developer for the metaverse has to think about, not as an ancillary add-on to their app, but as a part of the primary experience.
So I have a question you may not have time to answer. I get really 2 comments. One, both following on Kurt and Chris. The first one is about the AR, VR content you might create. Your example of the Blender. I think there's a lot of intention to create about the natural world, the natural, the conceptual and the math. I was wondering, when do we create exploration examples of the human society, history, civilization? We have civilization games, all those. When you create them, accuracy, what it reflects, because once you reach human beings are the kind of the worst type of people we have to deal with. Without human beings,
problem, not
the world would have been much better, right? So that's but related to that, when you were describing, Adam, like that experience, to say, so does Meta create a new society, or does it create millions of new societies? I'm sure on Facebook, you look at those tiny little groups, every group is its own society. And then they began to formulate their own ideas, without interacting with others, all those kind of, some just really wonder about, are we creating a new ideal society for everybody to practice, your example of giving, or because, we got how many societies, I don't know how many, just in the world. So what do you think about the equity issues, the digital issues? Even in the US, the DEI, is still a very American concept. But if you go to other society, like people writing about in the US, African Americans, minorities, Hispanics, it does not apply necessarily to Japan, to China, but then they have other issues. So I was just wondering about your general thoughts around those issues.
It's funny. I actually like how you first started that with, are we just replicating what we have in society today or building something new? And it's sort of this interesting parallel that I keep comparing. Although, the technology isn't new, it still feels like black and white film days of modern day cinema. And in the beginning, when we had film, we just taped shows because we didn't know what else it was capable of. So you take what you currently have, and that's where you start. And that's then the catalyst for something new that we're able to build. And so I think, we're in this weird space where it does look a lot like society. We kind of bring in what we already know. And I hope that that's where we stop and we do better as we move forward. And I think this is one of the places in innovation where we really are bringing together the governments, the academics, the tech industries. We are having those conversations in this moment in a way that we haven't historically done, because I think we have started to see just from the internet where all this can go. And so it's good that these conversations are all happening. But I think every time we reach that next little layer of building, and whether we start to see many, many worlds come out, whether we start to understand what the rules are, and just like that, those best practices, that they can become that new guiding force. But I think from where we are right now, these are things that we know we deeply need to think about and try to get ahead of rather than being reactive to it. But it's true that whatever you build and you get that many people, it will start to reflect humanity. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach to do it right.
Which you can see our audience is getting at the platform issues. You know, thank you for creating the platform. Yet, how is this similar or different from the platforms that have existed before? You know, what makes it unique, or what will make it unique in the future? We do have a minute or two left. If you want to comment on a couple of the audience questions that have appeared on the side here.
Kurt, you need to ask them because they don't have access to chat.
Oh, okay. So,
although what makes it unique is we're taking, the screens are getting closer to our face. We're getting glasses. We see with our eyes. It makes sense that we're trying to get everything off of like these tiny little screens where, it ends there. Your experience on the phone ends there. It should help you experience life in the real world, in a present moment with whoever you want to bring in as that avatar next to you. And so we're hoping to get to a place where, again, you seamlessly move between all these different methods of communication and interaction, where you can walk down the streets of New York and see what it looked like 200 years ago with a push of a button, where you can call in your friend and have them walk with you, or go to the Grand Canyon and see all the layers of the earth, but not everything through a small screen, but just in front of you. You can move the screen as big as you want. And so again, the idea is to be more present in the space surrounding you, to be more connected to those that you do want to interact with, see their body language, have the spatial audio, sort of that reinvention of what it used to feel like when you were together, but now we're all spread out all over the globe. And so how do we help recreate some of that? And then the learning, we don't have to just get knowledge anymore. We can learn through these simulated environments. We can transport ourselves through time and space and scale and have experiences that weren't really possible without this technology, that I think will add layers and layers to the way that we currently learn.
So Gerald's saying thank you for this creating this platform, and he also was the one who asked how is this different from what already exists with a plethora of platforms and increasing content experiences. It seems like we can already do a lot of this. And Robert has commented, have you considered identifying some big buckets for content that target purposeful uses? And he says, greetings from Milwaukee, Adam. So I'm from Milwaukee, Chris is from Milwaukee.
Some of the, I think, other market differences from things in the past is you went into a particular version of something and you were locked there. I think the concept of the metaverse is much more interoperable, where you can move from one world to another. And if you worked on that avatar in one place, that avatar can be your avatar in another place. And certainly taking a proactive build approach to building responsibly, with economic opportunity planned in from the beginning rather than kind of bolted on in the end. Same with privacy, same with safety and integrity. We talked a little bit about that. And certainly with respect to equity and inclusion. And I think a lot of the examples that at least I can think about from the past learn these things along the way rather than built them in from the beginning. And so I think we're at a place where as we build out this new form of the internet that really focuses on presence, we're doing so in a very responsible way.
So next week, we're going to have Noah Sobey on from UNESCO, talking about the future of learning. He's got one report from 6 months ago and a brand new report's been embargoed. It's going to come out next week when our show airs. And so he's coming from France. So we're going to be at 11:30 Eastern time, which is later in the afternoon in Paris time. Chris, you want to make a final comment or two?
Well, I want to thank both Adam and Monica for coming today. It's, as always, the hour has flown by, and you're leaving us with more questions than answers, which is exactly right. That's when you know it's been a good learning experience. I'm sure that people will be reaching out to you and learning more about what's happening with the formation of this new opportunity. But it is a very exciting time, and in a way, even though parts of the internet have become darker, that helps us understand how to do it better in this next phase. So thank you again for coming. It's been a great show. Thanks to all of you who've been watching this. Tell your friends to come and view the archived version. And who knows, maybe Silver Lining for Learning at some point will transpose out of Zoom and into the metaverse. Wouldn't that be an interesting?